The silence of my farm was my sanctuary, a hard-won peace after a life of noise and violence. But when 3 punks came tearing down my driveway, they didn't just break my fence, they woke a sleeping monster. The first thing you notice when you retire from a life of noise is the silence. Not an empty silence, but a living one. The sound of wind whispering through 10-foot-tall corn stalks, the contented clucking of my hens, the low groan of the old porch swing. For 5 years this farm, all 200 acres of it, has been my sanctuary. My penance, maybe. After 2 decades of seeing the worst of humanity in the darkest corners of the world, I just wanted to see something grow. I wanted to put my hands in the dirt and create, not destroy. My body changed, too. The wiry, coiled spring physique of my former life softened. The constant, brutal training regimens were replaced by the hard, honest labor of farming. I packed on 50 pounds, maybe more. The sharp angles of my face were blurred by a layer of comfort, and my hands, once calloused from trigger guards and climbing ropes, were now calloused from shovels and fence posts. To anyone looking, I was just Marcus, the big, quiet, black farmer who kept to himself. A gentle giant, some of the folks in town called me. I liked that. It felt like a costume I had earned, a cushy armor of peaceful anonymity. The man I used to be was buried deep beneath that armor, and I intended to keep him there. The trouble started, as it often does, with the sound of an engine that didn't belong. A rusted-out sedan, loud and obnoxious, came tearing down my long gravel driveway, spitting rocks against my prize-winning pumpkins. 3 of them spilled out. The one in charge was wiry, with a mean little smirk and eyes that darted everywhere, assessing, calculating. I called him Ricky in my head. The other 2 were just muscle, thick-necked and slow, flanking him like a pair of dull bookends. I was mending a fence post near the barn, and I didn't stop my work. I just watched them from the corner of my eye. My old training never really leaves you. You're always observing, always assessing threats. Ricky. Leader. Overconfident. Probably has a knife. Maybe a small pistol tucked in his jeans. Bookends. Followers. Fists are their primary weapons. Low situational awareness. The analysis was automatic, a reflex I had to consciously push down. I was a farmer now. "Hey, Pops," Ricky yelled, his voice grating. "This your place?" I slowly straightened up, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of a leather glove. I made my movements slow, deliberate, non-threatening. "It is," I said, my voice a low rumble. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Ricky's smirk widened. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my belly, straining against my denim overalls. "Gentlemen? Hear that, boys? The big man thinks we're gentlemen." His goons chuckled on cue. "We're looking for the old Henderson place. Got lost on these stupid dirt roads." I pointed with my thumb over my shoulder. 2 miles further down, can't miss it. Big white house, falling apart. "Thanks," he said. But they didn't move. They just stood there, looking around, their eyes stripping the place bare. They looked at my new tractor, the neat rows of crops, the solid construction of my barn. They were seeing value, not beauty. They were seeing opportunity. "Nice setup you got here," Ricky said, his tone shifting. It was no longer a lost traveler. It was a predator testing the fences. "Must be a lot of work for one old man." "I manage," I said, turning back to my post. My posture was a clear dismissal. Leave. Now. They got the message for a time. They piled back into their car, laughing about something, and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and disrespect in their wake. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I was holding. The silence returned, but it was thinner now. Tainted. They came back 2 days later. This time they didn't bother with the pretense of being lost. They parked their car right at the end of my drive, blocking it, and cranked up some horrible bass-heavy music that made the leaves on my oak tree tremble. They sat on the hood, drinking beer, and throwing the empty cans into my freshly cut hayfield. I walked the 1/4 mile down the drive to meet them. I kept my hands open and visible at my sides. De-escalation. That was the mission. "Fellas," I said, keeping my voice even, "I'm going to have to ask you to move along. This is private property." Ricky hopped off the car, crushing a can under his boot. He was closer now, and I could smell the cheap beer and stale cigarette smoke on him. "Or what?" he sneered, puffing out his chest. He was trying to intimidate me, using his wiry energy against my size, assuming my bulk was just fat, not muscle. "What are you going to do about it, Grandpa? Sit on us?" His friends howled with laughter. I just stood there, a mountain of placid patience. But inside, the old me was stirring. The part of me that calculated the 3 steps it would take to close the distance, the exact angle to break his nose, the precise way to use his friends' momentum against them. It was a cold, efficient voice, and it was getting harder to ignore. "There's no need for trouble," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Just leave." For a moment, Ricky seemed to hesitate. My stillness, my lack of reaction, was something he hadn't expected. But his ego won out. He flicked his cigarette butt at my feet. "We'll leave when we're good and ready," he snarled. "This is a free country, ain't it?" They stayed for another hour before getting bored and leaving. But the line had been drawn. They were testing me, pushing me, seeing how much I would take. The next time, I knew, would be worse. It came yesterday evening, just as the sun was bleeding orange and purple across the sky. Their car rolled up, slower this time, more deliberate. I was in the house, watching from the kitchen window as they got out. But this time they had tools, a crowbar, wire cutters. My blood went cold. They ignored the house, ignored me. They walked directly to the new stretch of split-rail fence I had just spent 2 weeks setting, the one that bordered the road. It was my pride and joy, a symbol of the orderly life I had built. Ricky looked directly at my kitchen window. He knew I was watching. He raised the crowbar, gave me a slow, mocking salute, and then slammed it into the top rail. The sound of splintering wood cracked through the evening air like a gunshot. His friends started laughing, yanking on the posts, tearing my hard work apart with animalistic glee. They weren't just vandalizing. They were sending a message. This is ours now. We can take whatever we want. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the kitchen sink so hard my knuckles were white. For 5 years I had cultivated peace. I had turned my back on violence, on the man I was trained to be. I had chosen the quiet life. But as I watched them shatter that life, piece by piece, I realized something. You can't bury a man like that forever. Sooner or later he claws his way out. I turned from the window, my movements no longer slow or gentle. They were sharp, precise, and filled with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I walked through my quiet house, past the family photos and handmade quilts, and into my bedroom. I knelt down, reached under the bed, and pulled out the old, dusty, military-issue footlocker that I hadn't opened since the day I moved in. The 2 heavy steel clasps were stiff. I snapped them open, one after the other. The sound echoed in the room, loud and final. The heavy lid creaked open, and the smell of gun oil and cold, hard discipline filled the quiet farmhouse air. Inside, the box was a time capsule. On top lay a neatly folded flag, the stars and stripes pristine. Beneath it, the tools of my other life. A Ka-Bar fighting knife, its leather sheath worn smooth in the shape of my grip. A Sig Sauer P226, disassembled and nestled in oil-soaked cloths, its weight familiar and comforting in my palm. There were maps of places I was never supposed to have been, challenge coins from units that didn't officially exist, and a small waterproof box. I opened it. Inside was a single faded photograph of my wife Sarah, smiling on our wedding day. I closed it gently. That was the only thing in this box that belonged to Marcus the farmer. The rest belonged to Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Cole, retired. I didn't take the gun. That was an escalation I wasn't ready for. Not yet. But the knife. I slid it from its sheath. The 7-inch carbon steel blade was still razor sharp, a dark, non-reflective gray. I ran my thumb over the fuller, the blood groove. A silent promise. I strapped the sheath to my belt, beneath my flannel shirt, where it sat cold and hard against my side. Then I closed the lid on the past and walked back outside into the dying light. The vandals were gone, of course. They were cowards, striking and running. I spent the next hour in the twilight, examining the damage. They hadn't just broken the fence, They had been systematic. They'd cut the wire tensioners and kicked out the support posts. It wasn't random destruction. It was a deliberate dismantling. A message. This would take me days, maybe a week, to repair properly. I left it. I let the broken fence stand as a monument to their mistake. Then I went back inside, not to sleep, but to wait. The farmer was done for the day. The operator was on watch. They didn't come back that night, or the next day. A full 48 hours passed. The silence returned, but it was heavy now, charged with anticipation. I fixed the fence, my movements efficient, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line, my ears tuned to the distant sound of engines. I was hunting. I just needed the prey to show itself. They came on the third day, around noon. They were bolder this time. They drove their noisy car right up the driveway and parked 10 yards from my barn. The same 3, but Ricky had a new swagger. My lack of immediate, violent reprisal had been misinterpreted as weakness. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken the old man's spirit. "Hey, fatso," he yelled, kicking open his car door. "Didn't fix your fence yet? Need some help?" His buddies cackled, pulling a cooler from the back seat. They were planning to stay. I walked out of the barn, holding a bucket of chicken feed. I kept my posture relaxed, my shoulders slightly slumped. I let the big, slow farmer persona settle back over me like a heavy coat. "Just give me a minute to feed my hens," I said, my voice mild. "Then we can talk." Ricky's eyes lit up with a cruel sort of glee. He glanced at his friends, then at my chicken coop. "Chickens," he said, drawing the word out. "I bet you got some nice fresh eggs in there." He started walking towards the coop. My blood turned to ice. My land, my property. That was one thing. But my animals, they were blameless. They were life. It was a line you did not cross. "Stay away from the coop," I said. My voice was different. The mildness was gone. It was flat, hard, and cold. Ricky stopped. He heard it too. He turned, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but his pride was already too committed. "Or what?" he challenged. That same old refrain. He took another step towards the coop and unlatched the simple wooden gate. The hens inside started clucking nervously. I set the bucket down. Very slowly. The sound of the metal handle hitting the gravel was unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. I started walking towards them. I didn't hurry. I just closed the distance. Each step was deliberate. My center of gravity lowered. The 50 extra pounds I carried were no longer soft armor. They were ballast, a foundation for power. Ricky's 2 bookends saw the change. They shifted their weight, instinctively moving to flank him. The one on the left clenched his fists. The one on the right reached for the tire iron they'd left on the hood of the car. They were telegraphing every move. "Last chance," I said, my voice a low growl. "Get in your car and drive away. Don't ever come back." Ricky laughed, but it was brittle. "You're all alone, old man. There's 3 of us." "There's 1 of me," I corrected. "That's more than you can handle." The bookend with the tire iron decided he'd had enough talk. He charged, swinging the heavy piece of metal in a wide, clumsy arc aimed at my head. It was laughably slow. I didn't step back. I stepped in, inside the arc of the swing. My left hand shot out, not to block the iron, but to intercept his wrist, my fingers finding the pressure points with practiced ease. His grip failed instantly, the tire iron clattering to the ground. In the same fluid motion, my right palm struck the side of his jaw. It wasn't a punch, it was a precise, stunning blow. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed like a sack of wet cement. It took less than a second. The other one froze, his fists half raised, his mouth agape in disbelief. He looked at his fallen friend, then at me. That hesitation was all I needed. 2 quick steps, a hard strike to the solar plexus that drove all the air from his lungs in a choked gasp, followed by a sweep kick to his ankle that sent him crashing to his knees, wheezing and helpless. Silence. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the nervous clucking of the hens and the ragged, panicked breathing of the man on the ground. I turned my head slowly to face Ricky. I hadn't even been breathing hard. My eyes were locked on his. The smirking, arrogant punk was gone. In his place was a terrified kid who had just watched a ghost dismantle his backup in the blink of an eye. The color had drained from his face. His hands were trembling. I, he stammered, backing away. You talk too much, I said, taking a step toward him. He kept backing up until he hit the side of his car. Trapped. His darting eyes screamed terror. He fumbled behind his back, his hand shaking violently as he pulled a small, cheap-looking pistol from the waistband of his jeans. He raised it, his knuckles white, the barrel wavering as he pointed it at my chest. "Stay back," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'll shoot you. I swear to God, I'll shoot." I stopped. I looked at the little gun in his trembling hand. Then I looked into his terrified eyes. And I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was all teeth. It was the smile of a shark that had just caught the scent of blood in the water. "A 380, I said, my voice calm, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "You're going to want to aim for the tee box. That's the eyes and the nose. It's your only chance, but you'd better not miss." The wavering barrel of the 380 was a joke, an insult. I'd had sniper rifles aimed at my head from a click away. I'd walked through streets where every window held a potential AK-47. This trembling kid with his pop gun was nothing. But the gun itself was a rule change. He had crossed the final line from harassment to lethal threat. The farmer was gone now. Completely. "You don't think I'll do it," Ricky squeaked, his voice a pathetic mix of fear and bravado. He tried to steady the gun with his other hand, a classic sign of an amateur. "I think you're about to make the biggest mistake of your short, miserable life," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I took another slow, deliberate step forward. Panic flared in his eyes. He squeezed the trigger. The pop of the small-caliber pistol was almost comical out here in the open. It was followed instantly by a sound he didn't expect. The sharp clang of metal on metal. He'd flinched, pulling the shot low and to the left. The bullet ricocheted off the heavy steel buckle of my overalls, the one right over my hip. It stung like a giant wasp, a deep, bruising impact that would leave a hell of a mark, but it didn't break the skin. Ricky stared, dumbfounded. He saw me standing there, completely unfazed. He'd shot me, and nothing happened. To his terrified mind, it must have seemed like magic. That split second of confusion was my window. I moved. It wasn't a charge. It was an explosion. 3 steps covered the distance between us. Before he could process what was happening, I had his gun hand. My left hand clamped down on his wrist like a vice, pointing the barrel of the pistol safely toward the sky. My right hand came up under his elbow, locking the joint. I applied pressure not enough to break it, just enough to send a blinding spike of agony from his elbow to his shoulder. He screamed, a high, thin sound, and the pistol dropped from his nerveless fingers. I kicked it away, sending it skittering under his car. I spun him around, slamming him face first against the side of his rusty sedan with a sickening thud. The car rocked on its suspension. I held him there with one hand pressed against the back of his neck, his face mashed into the dirty window. His whimpers were muffled. The fight was over. It had never really begun. The other 2 were starting to stir. The one I'd kicked was still on his knees, clutching his ribs. The one I'd dropped with the jaw strike was groaning, trying to push himself up on one elbow, his eyes glassy and unfocused. They weren't a threat anymore. They were just details to be cleaned up. I leaned in close to Ricky's ear, my voice a low, menacing rasp. "You came to my home. You destroyed my property. You threatened my animals. And you tried to kill me." I pressed his face harder against the glass. "You picked the wrong farmer." I reached under my shirt and pulled the car bar from its sheath. The sunlight glinted off the dark blade. I held it in front of his face, angling it so he could see his own terrified reflection. His eyes widened in absolute horror. He started blubbering, a stream of pleases and "I'm sorries." "Sorry doesn't fix my fence," I hissed. "Sorry doesn't unshoot a bullet." I wasn't going to kill him. I wasn't that man anymore. But he needed to understand. He and anyone he ever spoke to needed to understand that this place, my sanctuary, was off limits. Fear is a more effective deterrent than a no trespassing sign. I used the tip of the blade to slice the button off his jeans, then the next one, and the next. He trembled uncontrollably, but didn't dare move. I wasn't cutting him, just his clothes, the humiliation a sharper weapon than the steel. When I was done, I grabbed the collar of his t-shirt and ripped it straight down the middle. "Now listen to me very carefully," I said, my lips practically touching his ear. "You're going to take your 2 broken friends, you're going to get in your car, and you're going to disappear. If I ever see your face again, if I ever see a car that even looks like this one on my road, I won't be this gentle. Do you understand me?" He nodded frantically, sobbing. "I can't hear you," I said, pressing his head a little harder. Yes, I understand," he cried. I let him go. He stumbled back, clutching his ruined clothes, looking at me with the kind of primal terror I hadn't seen since my days in the sandbox. I pointed at his friends. "Get them. Go." It was a pathetic sight. He half dragged, half pushed his dazed and wounded accomplices into the car. The one with the bruised jaw was still seeing stars, and the other could barely breathe. Ricky scrambled into the driver's seat, his hands shaking so badly he could hardly get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. He slammed it into reverse, not even looking, and peeled out of my driveway, spitting gravel and trailing a cloud of blue smoke. I stood there, watching them go, the car bar still in my hand. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, familiar calm. The chickens were clucking again. The wind was rustling the corn. The silence was back, but it was my silence now. I had reclaimed it. I picked up the tire iron and the little .380 pistol. Evidence. I walked back to the barn, my side throbbing where the bullet had hit. It was just a bruise. I'd had worse from training exercises. Still, it was a reminder of how close the wolf always is to the door. That evening, as I was cleaning and oiling the little pistol before securing it in my locker, I heard another vehicle coming down my drive. It wasn't Ricky's junk heap. This was a heavy, powerful engine, moving slowly, deliberately. I looked out the window. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. It was a black, late-model pickup truck, the kind with tinted windows and an imposing grille. It didn't look like it belonged to any of my neighbors. It pulled to a stop right where the other car had been. The driver's side door opened and a man got out. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed absurdly out of place on a farm. He had silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He looked around, his gaze sharp and intelligent, taking in the house, the barn, the broken fence line. Then his eyes locked onto my window, as if he knew I was standing right there. He reached into his suit jacket, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a wallet and flipped it open. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the glint of the gold badge, Sheriff's Department. But something was wrong. This wasn't the local sheriff, a pot-bellied man named Bill whom I shared coffee with at the diner sometimes. This was someone else entirely. Then another man got out of the passenger side. He was younger, bigger, and wore a black polo shirt with a subtle county emblem on the sleeve. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, and he had the unmistakable posture of a lawman who was expecting trouble. The sheriff looked down at the ground, at the scuff marks and the disturbed gravel from the fight. He then looked back at my house, a grim, unreadable expression on his face. He said something to his deputy, then started walking, not toward my front door, but directly toward the chicken coop. I met him at the corner of the barn. I had left the car bar inside but made no effort to hide the tire iron I still carried in my left hand. My posture was neutral, non-threatening, but my eyes were on his, watching for the slightest indication of intent. The deputy stayed by the truck, a silent, imposing statue. "Can I help you, Sheriff?" I asked. My voice was calm, but the question hung in the air, thick with unsaid things. The man stopped a few feet from me. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, and they missed nothing. They flickered to the tire iron, to the fresh bruise surely blooming on my side, under my shirt, to the torn-up ground, and then back to my face. He wasn't the local law. He was something more. "That's a good question," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "I'm Sheriff Thompson. from the next county over. I was hoping you could help me with it." He gestured with his chin toward the driveway. "Had a young man named Richard Pike and 2 of his associates show up in my emergency room about an hour ago. One with a possible concussion and a dislocated jaw, another with cracked ribs, and young Mr. Pike himself looking like he'd seen a ghost. They were less than forthcoming about how they sustained their injuries. Something about a tractor accident." He let the lie hang in the air between us. "Funny thing is," he continued, "their car had scrapes on the side, and one of them had splinters in his cheek. And a deputy of mine happened to see their car speeding away from this direction right around the time the accident would have occurred. So I thought I'd come ask the neighbors if they'd seen anything. It was a test. He knew. He was giving me an out, a chance to play the dumb farmer. 5 years ago, I would have taken it. But today something had broken open. The armor of anonymity had been cracked, and I was tired of pretending to be weaker than I was. They weren't in a tractor accident," I said, my voice level. "They were here, they destroyed my property, and then the one named Pike pulled a gun on me." Thompson's expression didn't change, but a new intensity sharpened his gaze. "A gun? Did he fire it?" I nodded slowly. "Once. He missed." "And you defended yourself," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I did." He was silent for a long moment, studying my face, my stance, the way I held the tire iron not as a weapon, but as a piece of evidence. "Mr. Pike is the son of a very wealthy, very influential man in my county," Thompson said, his tone carefully neutral. "A man who believes his son can do no wrong, and that his money can fix anything. He's already making calls, screaming about assault charges against some big, violent farmer who attacked his boy for no reason." A cold anger settled in my gut. Of course, it was never just about 3 punks. There was always someone bigger, someone with money and power, pulling the strings. "I see," I said. "And you're here to—" "What? Arrest me?" Thompson finally allowed a small wry smile to touch his lips. "I'm here to conduct an investigation, Mr. Cole." The name hit me like a physical blow. Cole. Not Marcus, the gentle giant from town. Cole. He knew. My carefully constructed identity had just evaporated in the evening air. "Before I was elected sheriff," Thompson continued, almost conversationally, "I did a 12-year stint with the FBI, counter-terrorism. I spent some time liaising with JSOC. Heard a few stories about a senior chief named Marcus Cole, a ghost, a guy they sent in when things went sideways in the worst places on Earth. They said he retired, fell off the grid completely. Bought a farm, people thought." He looked me straight in the eye. "You look different than the file photos, heavier, calmer. But the eyes are the same." I let out a slow breath and dropped the tire iron. The game was up. It was a clean fight, Sheriff. I used non-lethal force until he drew a weapon. I disarmed him. I let them leave. "I believe you," Thompson said simply. He walked over to where I'd kicked the pistol and nudged it with his foot. "A Bryco, 380, junk gun, but it's still a firearm, and he pointed it at you. That's attempted murder of an agriculturalist." The corner of his mouth twitched. "I'm going to need to take this pistol as evidence, and that tire iron." He turned back to me, his face serious again. "Here's what's going to happen. My deputy is going to take my statement. My statement will say that I responded to a call, found evidence of vandalism, and discovered a firearm at the scene, which suggests the vandals were armed and dangerous. It will say that you, the property owner, were shaken but unharmed, and that you declined to press charges, stating only that you scared them off. The Pike kid and his friends can explain their injuries however they want, but without a cooperating victim, his father's lawyers have nothing to work with." I stared at him, trying to read the angle. Cops, even good ones, didn't usually do favors like this. "Why?" I asked, the single word carrying all my suspicion. Thompson's gaze softened for the first time. He looked around at the fields, the barn, the peaceful sunset. "Because I know who you are, Senior Chief. I know what you've done for this country. You've earned the right to be left alone. You've earned your peace. And because, frankly, I can't stand the Pike family, and I think that spoiled brat of his just got a lesson that no amount of his father's money could ever buy." He extended a hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Cole." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his handshake that of an honest man. "Marcus," I said. "Just Marcus." "Marcus," he agreed, with a nod. He and his deputy gathered the evidence, took a few photos of the broken fence, and left. As their truck disappeared down the driveway, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The silence that settled over the farm this time was different. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't tainted. It was whole. It was earned. I walked back to my porch and sat on the old swing, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. The fight hadn't destroyed my peace. It had forged it into something stronger. I wasn't just hiding here anymore. I was standing my ground. I was no longer just Marcus the farmer or Cole the operator. I was both. A man who could nurture life from the soil with one hand and defend it fiercely with the other. The two halves of myself, once at war, had finally found their own kind of peace, right here, in the quiet heart of my farm. The man I used to be wasn't buried anymore. He was standing guard.